introduced this term, the nadis, and I think you're referring to centers of energy like ganglia of nerves that might be located in the arms and the legs, around the sides, almost sort of like the acupuncture meridians or acupuncture points.
That's good enough.
Yeah. And also in yoga, there's the concept of the chakras being central organs of psychic energy located right along the spinal column, basically. Up the third eye is one we often hear about. Now, these are concepts that have been articulated very cogently and in quite a lot of detail in yogic philosophy, and I gather these are concepts that you take seriously as a medical doctor.
Not really. I take seriously the new event in the brain, a new, as you said, psychophysiological event in the brain, which is what the Kundalini is to me. The peripheral signs and symptoms and the descriptions which refer to the spinal cord and the accessory systems, whatever they are, acupuncture and nadis, are all derivative from the central event in the brain, which is a change itself, which represents psychophysiological change in the whole organism. And this change then gives the person who has spiritual inclinations the equipment with which to more adequately join with the divine, which, as you said, is the original meaning of yoga.
Now, the experience that is called Kundalini, this change in the brain, if one were in a culture such as the Hindu culture or other comparable cultures, if a person had this experience and communicated it to other people, it would be identified in this spiritual context. Oh yes, it's Kundalini. And a person would be treated within that social framework. In our culture, when a person typically has the same experience, and I gather you've worked with people who have had it spontaneously or people who have been meditating and all of a sudden had it, what happens?
Well, it's largely something which you have learned not to talk too much about, because people have no understanding of it, in general, of course, and therefore you looked at as being quite odd, if not a little bit worse than odd, and more, seriously afflicted than just being odd.
So in other words, in one culture, this would be considered a very auspicious experience. People would be happy. A person would be getting a lot of positive attention and support to go through the experience, to let it unfold. In our own culture, the response might be quite the opposite.
Yes. And, there are lots of other openings in the sense that this is not the only one. This is probably, we should call it the master opening in the psychophysiology of the human being. But there are lots of preliminary and other states, psychic states, that correspond to the yoga siddhis or powers, which, like out-of-the-body states, for instance, or bilocation states, or whatever the states are, and all of them are, in the sense, real. They are clearly defined in yoga, and people experience them, and if anyone wants to take the time and effort to search them out, they still exist all over the world.
And people might experience these states without being engaged in any spiritual practice at all.
Certainly.
And it must be all the more confusing for these people.
Yes, because I've had people write me the oddest things. Take this cantaloni away from me. I don't want it anymore. It's bothering me. It can't do my work. Keeps me awake at night. It's very annoying to in some cases and to some people.
Well, let's talk about psychosis for a minute, Lee. I mean, these experiences seem to be breaks with reality. People are hearing voices, seeing visions, having physical ailments for which there is no organic cause. These are all typical symptoms of psychosis. Do you view all psychosis as a spiritual opening?
No. Psychosis may accompany spiritual openings of this kind, either in part or almost continuously, and the two can be distinguished and should be. because the psychosis is not something, it's something to be understood, but not supported in the same way that you would support a spiritual opening, which is a normal sort of process that man is heir to.
Can you define psychosis then and try and distinguish between it and a spiritual opening?
Psychosis in general is having no insight into all of these things that are going on. It is aberration without understanding of that aberration as being aberrated. And that's a crude definition, but you get a very clear idea of what is psychotic and what is not simply by talking to someone in the ordinary way. I mean, they might start off on a total tangent or show absolutely no emotional responsiveness to some things and a super responsiveness to others, inappropriate affect, and so forth.
Often, I mean, a classic example of what we think of as psychosis are people who believe themselves to be Jesus Christ.
Yeah.
Now, sometimes this might represent a genuine spiritual opening, sometimes it might not.
Yes.
And to discern whether or not that spiritual opening is legitimate must be a very subtle and delicate thing to do.
Well, it is, and it could change from moment to moment in the person if they were relatively unstable.
Yeah. Now, you, in working in developing the procedures in the Kundalini clinic, have spent a lot of time with people who are having genuine spiritual openings that would appear to be psychotic and need support within our Western context to get through that.
Well, yes, that's the primary mode of treatment, is support for that part of it which is, as I say, explainable and understandable in historical and cross-cultural terms, because this appears in all cultures. And that part which is universal to man also, which is his aberrated state.
I would suppose that the basic kind of support that could be offered is just to be with that person and to let them communicate with you what they're experiencing as they experience it without judging them.
Well, that's I would say that's the primary mode of therapy.
Yeah. Does it involve, for example, meditating together with them?
It does sometimes. It could, certainly, if that is something that comes natural to the therapist.
Yeah.
If it's not, that's a different matter. Some of us are talented in that way, and some of us are talented in other ways, and some of us like to massage, manipulate, and so forth.
Yeah. Well, I would think a big problem that a person would have experiencing a Kundalini experience or a spiritual opening would be how it would affect their relationships with their family, with their spouse or loved ones, with their children. How are they going to communicate what's happening to them to other people who may have no context within which this would make sense at all?
It's very difficult. That's one of the main difficulties, and that's why lots of people get more unstable than they need to be, because they don't have this outlet and they don't have the understanding that surrounds them. And it's quite difficult, and also they are apt to become quite grandiose about it as a compensation for the put down or let down that they feel.
Yeah.